extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on Talk Radio AM 640.
I'm the guy they call the Spaceman. This is A View from Space. I'd like to welcome you if you're driving around town right now, listening to AM 640. I'd like to welcome you in if you're at work listening to, or if you're checked into Shaw Direct on Channel 865, picking up the show there on your television set, I welcome you in also. Or if you're listening to me on your 3 or 4G personal communication device via the Stream the World software, I welcome you in too. Or if you're what some call the best seat in the house to check out A View from Space, sitting in front of your Mac or your PC at home, logged on to 640toronto.com, picking up the live audio streaming there, I welcome you in. Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you in. This is the month of March. March is when the seeds are planted, and then the harvest begins in the fall. The seeds are now being planted. Keep that in mind. March, named after Mars, the Roman god of war. He was the son of Juno. And, of course, here in Canada, we have a music awards show called The Junos, and the little statue is, of course, to tell you that you have reached the pinnacle. You have become a god in Canadian music. It's the Canadian Music Awards for the whole year. We call them the Junos. Now you know why it's held in March. As a matter of fact, the Junos are being held here in Canada tomorrow. And in some places in the world already where you're listening to me on Sunday, today. Yes, Mars, the son of Juno and Zeus. And at first was the Roman god of fertility and vegetation and protector of cattle. But later this spirit, this elite rich son who became a god, became associated with battle. As the god of spring, when his major festivals were held, he presided over agriculture in general. In his warlike aspect, Mars was offered sacrifices before combat, and was said to appear on the battlefield accompanied by a war goddess named Bellona, identified as a wife, sister, or daughter. He also had a wife named Nerio. And it's believed that Mars was originally an ancient chthonic god of spring, nature, fertility, and cattle. He fused with the Greek Ares and became a god of death and war as well. In Rome, his biggest temple was on the Capitol in Rome, shared with Jupiter, and Quirinus. The Temple to Mars Ultor, it was called. The Avenger, translated to English, was in the Forum Augustus. Another temple to Mars, Gradivus, it was called, meaning he who precedes the army in battle, was where the army gathered before leaving for wars. Campus Martius, meaning Field of Mars in Latin, was dedicated to him also. It was where soldiers and athletes trained. Mars was called Mavors in some poetry by Virgil. The Hestae Martiae were kept in a small chamber. You know what they were? They were the lances of Mars, the god of war. Any movement of this Hestae Martiae, the lances of Mars, was seen as an omen of war. If Rome was attacking, the generals moved lances and repeated the Mars Vigilia ritual, meaning Mars awaken. March 1st, just passed, called the Feri Martii, was celebrated then in ancient Rome. On October 19th, the Amelustrium, was celebrated. The weapons of the soldiers that they were to carry in a battle were purified and stored. Now, every 5 years, the Suovertorilia would be celebrated, where there were blood sacrifices and, of course, wars planned. February 27th and March 14th, the horse races of Equir were held. And on March 23rd, the Tubilestrium was celebrated by purifying weapons and war trumpets for the impending wars. Priests of Mars and Quirinus were called the Sali, jumpers in English. When you translate it, they were referred to as jumpers because they would leap down the streets, jumping and singing the Carmen Saliere. A priest of Mars alone was called a Flamen Martialis. Now, in art, Mars is depicted as an armored warrior with a crested helmet. The wolf and woodpecker birds, the bird, woodpecker, and the wolf are sacred to him. His children are Fiji and Timor. The month of March, of course, named after Mars. And unlike his Greek counterpart, Ares, he was more openly worshipped than any other of the Roman gods, probably because of his sons Romulus and Remus were said to have founded Rome. Yes, Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, that were raised in a cave by a wolf, were the sons, the twins of Mars. The Romans called themselves sons of Mars, as a matter of fact, as the consort of Rhea Silvia, the father of Romulus and Remus. Mars was considered the father of all Roman people. That's where your month March comes from, and it's here for a reason, planting the seeds that to be harvested in the fall. This is a gigantic week, this one coming up, for the history of the Illuminati and their quest for a one-world government, which will be the final system needed to attain their diabolical goal of a one-world government with one leader, one earth, one king. It all started on what's coming up tomorrow, this coming Sunday, the Ides of March, the 15th. Then the Tuesday of this week coming up, the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. To follow that, the Friday, the spring vernal equinox itself, occurring at 6:45 Eastern Daylight Time here in North America. When I come back, an expose on the month of March, and those days in it, and even more. This is A View from Space and Talk Radio, AM 640. I'm the Spaceman, and I'm just getting started. I'm a guy that calls Space. This is A View from Space. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. I communicate by email only. Two addresses, space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. And this month of March, named after, of course, the Roman god of war, we are getting ready for a war. We are geared up for a war. PM writes, here in Canada, as you know, there were protests against this new so-called anti-terror bill, Bill C-51, today here in Canada. I witnessed the Illuminati mass-controlled media and their trickery today. The headline stated, thousands protest Bill C-51. Then, magically, less than an hour later, it was changed to hundreds instead of thousands. More trickery for the masses. Some PM in a bunker somewhere in northern Ontario, Canada. Yes, things are moving quickly towards a war footing. In every country. It doesn't matter what country you're in that I'm talking to now. You feel it too. And it all started this coming Sunday, March 15th, that's tomorrow, 2059 years ago. You know what happened? March 15th, 2059 years ago. It takes us back to 44 BC. An event that changed an empire forever. Took another step closer in their long, enduring task of destroying one empire and setting up another in its place. Of course, this involves the story of the mythic bird, also called the phoenix, now cleverly or not so cleverly disguised as the eagle. The phoenix is a mythical sacred firebird that is found in Persian mythology, ancient Phoenician mythology, also in Chinese mythology, Egyptian religion, and later even Greek mythology. So if you'll notice, it's included in all of the great empires of the world that were, because these were sun worshippers that ran the empires that came before the one we now have, the American Empire, and still are running things and are about to change their empires again. Everything you've been taught is a lie. As I've said, this week started with the Sunday, the Ides of March. Then comes the day of the celebration of the ancient Egyptian religion deity Osiris. You may now be asking yourself, if you're not a regular listener to ABFS on Talk Radio AM 640, what will I celebrate this week that has anything to do with the ancient Egyptian sun-worshipping religion and Osiris? Well, it's a holiday that's been consistently growing in popularity with every single year that passes, and has been, well, a huge part of our past, and has been heavily sold to our youth as what? As a drinking holiday, an excuse to party. They're already starting it right now, this weekend. But none of this is new. There's nothing new under the sun. History is simply repeating itself. The celebration of the Egyptian deity, known as Osiris, is St. Patrick's Day disguised. That's what they call it for you today, just as the month of March is cleverly disguised in their Mars, the god of war, elite family member from this elite holy royal bloodline. That is also continuing today, still in power. Contrary to belief, most people believe St. Patrick's Day is an Irish celebration. It's not. It's not even an American celebration, even though the very first St. Patrick's Day parade took place in New York City. The history of St. Patrick's Day can be traced back through the ancient Roman Empire and all the way back to ancient Egypt, because you see, nothing is new. Only the old has been, well, cleverly disguised in this world we live in today. Religion is the great manipulator of mankind, and it was used here. March 17th is the day incorrectly believed to be the death of St. Patrick, the British-born missionary who is credited with converting Ireland to Christianity. What a joke. That's a huge lie that you've been taught. In the ancient mystery Egyptian religion, Osiris, the first sun god of Egypt, was killed on the 17th day of Athir. Athir was the third month of the ancient Egyptian calendar. So that gives a connotation of third month, 3, the date 17, so 317. Well, 317 is also the date of a Masonically created holiday called St. Patrick's Day. This holiday was established by high-level Freemasonry and founding fathers and first presidents of America, George Washington. Unelected, by the way, was George Washington, the first president of the United States. Funny, isn't it, in a democracy that they claim to be? George Washington used it, the story goes, to reward Irish soldiers in the Continental Army. But St. Patrick's has traditionally been a very minor saint's day in Ireland. What Washington did was to actually superimpose, that is to say, create a supposed Christian celebration on top of a day that really and truly celebrates the highest god of sun worship ever all time, Osiris. That day has become Americans' de facto bacchanal, which takes us back to Osiris. Here is the proof that this day is totally connected with solar mythology. Osiris was believed to be the source of barley, which was used for brewing beer in Egypt. What's the biggest, most popular drink on St. Patrick's Day? Beer. It's customary to wear green on St. Paddy's Day, too, and Osiris was known as the Green Man. He knew when the sun would shine once again and crops should be planted. He knew when the spring came. With the ancient knowledge that they had, being the Pharaoh, he was known as the Green Man because he made all of the shores of the Nile green with food. The root word of Patrick is pater, the Latin word meaning father. Osiris, of course, is the father in the Egyptian Trinity. Now, if you research the actual origin of this holiday, St. Patrick's Day, you're going to find some pretty interesting facts. Here's one. St. Patrick's Day was originally celebrated by Protestant loyalists in the British Army. March 17th was, in actual fact, Evacuation Day. That's right, March 17th. Evacuation Day, when in 1776 the Brits had to leave Boston, flee Boston after the appearance of the Continental Army's cannons on the Dorchester Heights. So, more than the 4th of July, this event was the one that gave the colonists the chance to believe they could beat the British Empire. Now, if you look at early American history, the British did not try very hard to keep America as a colony. In fact, the only troops that were there left to fight were ones who had been there for some time and were pretty outnumbered. Let me put it this way. It was allowed to split from British authority. Sort of. The real control of America is through the Federal Reserve Bank even today, which is set up by the British elite banking system. America was to be the great Masonic experiment that would eventually be built into, well, what it once was, a great empire, which we are now witnessing the destruction of. And out of this smoke and fire will be their final system arising on the earth. Their global empire, their final empire. General George Washington's first meeting and dinner to honor St. Patrick, by the way, was supposedly an expression of their Protestant faith, as well as their intention to bond with fellow Irish immigrants. Their 1775 meeting included British soldiers of Irish extraction. All proceeded or marched to the King's Chapel to hear a sermon devoted to the occasion, and then continued on to a dinner on King Street. British soldiers were still the big show on the first St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City, too, in 1762. The first celebration in New York City was in 1756 at the Crown and Thistle Tavern. General George Washington issued a proclamation, as a matter of fact, during the Revolutionary War, declaring March 17, the day Osiris died and was resurrected. March 17th, 1780 would be a holiday for the Continental Army, as declared by George Washington, then stationed in Morristown, New Jersey, in honor of the many soldiers of the Irish ancestry and those born in Ireland. It was reported that this was the first holiday ever granted troops in 2 years. Washington's remark that the proclamation was an act of solidarity with the Irish in their fight for independence was possibly the origins of St. Patrick's Day in America as an expression of Irish nationalism as much as Irish heritage, or of honoring a Christian saint. Since many lodges, Masonic lodges, in Revolutionary era America were chartered under the Grand Lodge of Ireland, most of those Irish soldiers were Freemasons from Ireland. Remember, this was way before William Morgan was murdered in America, when Freemasons were hardcore and not yet perceived as a threat in America at all. When I come back, I'll give you an idea of how much of a Masonic-controlled event the American Revolution actually was. Just briefly. That's when I return on Talk Radio, AM 640, I'm Space. I'm Space. It's a view from space. Talk Radio, AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. Now, SR, my resident numerologist, has checked in, and awful early tonight. He was right on the money, picking the word Mars, using simple English gematria, as he always does. Letter A is 1, letter B is 2, and up to 26. Mars, M-A-R-S, breaks down to a 51 in English gematria. The number is 51. And he breaks down 51 further to 3 times 17. And as I've said many times before here on the show, to magnify a number 3 times is the maximum, to get the most out of the spell. 17, the death and resurrection date of the very first Egyptian solar king, Osiris, is that royal perfect number 3 times 17, giving you 51, making up the numbers in simple English gematria in the name Mars. 3, of course, times 17 is 51. March is the 3rd month, 17th day. In the ancient Egyptian calendar, the death date and resurrection date of Osiris was the 3rd month, the 17th day. Starting to become a little less accidental and coincidental and looks more like it's planned? Well, you bet it was. And a very, very interesting question he poses at the end of his email, my resident numerologist. Are Mars and Osiris related? Wow. Yes, nothing is as it seems in this world of illusion. Even the iconic American, well, what they called Revolutionary War is really not what many think. Let me just quickly give you an idea of how much of a Masonically controlled event that war was in America. 74 men in the Revolutionary War in America were commissioned as generals in the United States Continental Army from 1775 right through till 1783. 33, 3 times 11, were Freemasons. That's 46%. Including, of course, George Washington of Virginia himself, General James Varnum, Rhode Island, General William Thompson, Pennsylvania. General Jethro Sumner, North Carolina. General John Sullivan, New Hampshire. General Israel Putnam, Connecticut. General John Nixon, Massachusetts. General Richard Montgomery, New York. General Mordecai Gist of Maryland. Benjamin Lincoln of Massachusetts. Yes, nothing is as it seems. Even the iconic American structure of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. isn't an idea that was thought up by some American. It's a direct copy of the statue of Zeus, which stood in the temple of Zeus in Olympia, Greece, from 1432 B.C. to sometime in the 5th century A.D. Their web of deceit and lies is perpetuated in the make-believe history you're taught in the education system. Like Julius Caesar, for instance. You're taught how Julius Caesar was killed on March 15th, the Ides of March, but you're not taught that the 15th of March is related to the celebration of the Liberalia. Also, the procession of the Argi, celebrated on March 16th and 17th, the eve of the Liberalia. The Liberalia is the festival of Liber Pater and his consort Libera. Isis, really, with just a different name. Isis in the Egyptian, Semiramis in the Assyrian, Ishtar in the Babylonian, Isis in the Egyptian. The Romans celebrated Liberalia with sacrifices, blood sacrifices, processions, ribald and gauche songs, and masks that were actually hung on trees. This feast celebrated the maturity, too, of young boys to manhood. Roman boys, usually around 14 years of age, would remove the bulla praetexta, it was called, a hollow charm of gold or leather, which parents actually placed around the necks of their children to ward off evil spirits. At the Liberalia ceremony, these young men might even place the bulla on an altar with a lock of hair or the stubble of his first shave placed inside and dedicated to Lares, who were the gods of the household and family. Liberalia was meant to honor Liber Pater, the ancient god of fertility and wine, like Bacchus, the Roman version of the Greek god Dionysus. The priestesses would wear wreaths of ivy. They call it the wearing of the green today. Wow. Liberalia is relatively unknown in modern times today. The references to Liberalia and the Roman goddess live on today and are still found in our celebrations. The priestesses would wear wreaths of ivy. That's directly where the wearing of the green, if you're participating this next few days, being Tuesday, St. Patrick's Day, there will be a lot of the wearing of the green, and everyone will go, "Oh, you're wearing green today." Continuing the ancient ritual of the priestesses who would wear wreaths of ivy in Liberalia. The assassination of Julius Caesar had a very real continuing blood sacrifice ritual aspect to it, too. Not just one sacrifice. John F. Kennedy is also a part of this killing of the king, these great sacrifices through history to presage these new empires rising up. They're actually cornerstones, consecrating with a blood sacrifice the ritual. The assassination of Caesar had a very real, continuing blood sacrifice ritual aspect to it, being repeated through history on the same date, having to do with one empire ending in another beginning. After all, it was the death of Caesar that really came before the rise of the new empire. Cleopatra had a relief carved at the famous temple of Dendera of herself as Isis. and she and Caesar's son, Antony, as Horus. The Ides, by the way, merely means the middle. Therefore, the Ides of March, the 15th of March, would be the middle of the month. Anyhow, it looks like this date is a very important one for empires to be changed, morphed. Another more powerful one rising out of the death of the other former one. In some sort of ritual sacrifice on this date throughout history, like a part of some secret master plan, on March 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar is murdered. Mark Antony, a Roman general and one of the three men who then ruled Rome, crowns Cleopatra and himself as rulers of Egypt and the eastern third of the Roman Empire, uniting the world, as it were. This date, March 15th, the Ides of March, figure prominently in Russian history also. During World War I, in the aftermath of the Great Retreat and the loss of the Kingdom of Poland, Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, assumed the role of commander-in-chief of the armed forces after dismissing his cousin, Nikolai Nikolaevich, in September of 1915. It was a fatal mistake. He then became personally associated with the continuing losses at the front. It was also away at the remote headquarters in Mogilev, far from the direct governance of the empire, and when the revolution broke out in Petrograd, he was unable to prevent it. In reality, the move was really just symbolic, since all important military decisions were made by his chief of staff, General Mike Alexiev, and Tsar Nicholas II did very little more than review troops, inspect field hospitals, preside over military lunches. After Father Gabon, the Orthodox priest and agent provocateur who led the workers' procession to present a petition to the Tsar to abdicate, which ended tragically on what's known as Bloody Sunday, at the end of what's called the February Revolution of 1917. February in the old Russian calendar was actually March 2nd on the Julian calendar, March 15th, the Ides of March on the Gregorian calendar. Isn't it interesting? The year was 1917. That was the day that Nicholas II abdicated, March 15th. The old Russian calendar, March 2nd. Yes, the very same day as the murder of Julius Caesar, the blood sacrifice is followed by a change of an empire. By the way, those people are still kicking around too. Like, for instance, Tsar Nicholas II, Michael Ignatieff, the former leader of the Liberal Party, which ran for prime minister a few years ago, and was the actual opposition party leader here in Canada for a while. His paternal grandfather, Count Paul Ignatieff, was the last Tsarist minister of education for Tsar Nicholas II. And this man was in politics in Canada here just a few years ago. He was spared from execution by the Bolsheviks, the paternal grandfather of Michael Ignatieff, a Canadian politician. His great-grandfather was Count Nikolai Pavlovich Ignatieff, the Russian Minister of the Interior under Tsar Alexander III. You know what I believe? I believe the Romanov family was never actually murdered at all, but escaped. And it was made possible by the British through a series of underground tunnels in the basement of the two-story Ipatiev house. This was the home of the military engineer, Nikolai Ipatiev. And the cover-up of the murder of the Romanovs began. Space back with more on the other side of this break. It's Talk Radio AM 640. We've got a call with Spaceman. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to space at 640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. Got some information you'd like to send, or you've got a critique of the show, or you just like to say where in the world you're listening to AVFS Talk Radio AM 640 from, use either one of those addresses. DP from the U.S. writes, "Hey, Space, I was looking over my old emails tonight, and I realized I've been listening to you for 5.5 years now. Thank you." Yes, once you start to understand where this show is coming from, and it takes a few shows to, well, get your legs, then things really start to fall into place. And instead of going, what? You're going, aha. Like with what I'm about to tell you with the Romanov family. I don't believe they were actually ever murdered, but escaped through a series of tunnels by the British, made possible by the British who smuggled them out of the Ipatiev house. It was the home of the military engineer, Nikolai Ipatiev. And the cover-up began. You see, in 1979, the bodies of Tsar Nicholas II, supposedly, and Tsarina Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, and those of 4 non-family members supposedly killed with them, were discovered near Yekaterinburg by an amateur archaeologist, of all things. Alexander Avdonin was his name. In January of 1998, the remains excavated from underneath the dirt road near this place called Yekaterinburg were officially identified as Nicholas II and his family, excluding one of the sisters and Alexei. The identifications by separate Russian, British, and American scientists using DNA analysis were assured concurred, and they were found to be conclusive. After the testing, the remains were finally interred at St. Peter's and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg on July 17, 1998, 80 years after they were murdered, supposedly. 80 years. Drop the 0. You have the sun worshippers 8. In July 2007, 46-year-old builder Sergei Pogorlov was part of a team from an amateur history group who spent the summer weekends looking for the lost Romanovs, said that after stumbling on a small burned area of ground covered with nettles near Yekaterinburg, he had discovered bones that belonged to a boy and a young woman, roughly the age of Nicholas's 13-year-old hemophiliac son, Alexei, and a daughter whose remains also have never been found. August 23, 2007, acting on standard procedures, we're told, prosecutors reopened the investigation surrounding the deaths of the imperial family, the Romanovs. This whole murder hoax fable was officially announced to be wrapped up with a tight little bow on the very same day that Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler supposedly committed suicide. April 30th was the date picked. April 30th, 2008. DNA tests performed by a U.S. lab prove that bone fragments exhumed in the Ural Mountains belonged to the 2 members of the imperial royal family. According to Russian news agencies, that same day it was announced by Russian authorities that the remains of the entire family had been identified. That was April 30th, 2008, the very day of the supposed death date of Adolf Hitler, exactly 63 years later. So, under the old Merovingian sorcerer king guise of making it look like they're removing the monarchies and dictatorial leaders of all the countries throughout history and installing the replacement system, what they call their darling democracy, doing the will of the people instead of a king or some dictator, this new system of fairness, this thing called democracy, can then be used to grab control of every single state on the planet where the people rule. Yeah, right. Through elections. We choose our leaders ourselves, they tell us. You're naive if you think elections are fair, or the people who are put in power in government really do the will of the people. The family bloodlines are all there if you check the politicians. They're career politician families. And this is just not happening in politics. It's happening everywhere. Democracy is an illusion used by the bloodline of the Merovingian sorcerer kings. They invented it. Here's more illusion. Up until very recently, St. Patrick's Day was not a very big deal in Ireland itself. In modern-day Ireland, St. Patrick's Day has traditionally been a religious occasion only. In fact, up until the 70s, Irish laws mandated the pubs be closed on March 17th. Beginning in 1995, though, the Irish government began a national campaign to use St. Patrick's Day as an opportunity to drive tourism and showcase Ireland to the rest of the world. Last year, close to 1 million people took part in Ireland's St. Patrick's Festival in Dublin, a multi-day celebration. Had parades, concerts, outdoor theater productions, fireworks shows. I've already given you ample proof that the modern St. Patrick's Day shares both a date and a mandate with a far older celebration. And there's even more. St. Patrick's Day is actually being sold to the youth of today as a time for drinking. It used to be that this tradition was strung out for at least 5 days, the so-called Sectane na Gaelach, or Irish Week. This comes from Roman times, when March 17th started the festival of Bacchanalia, a celebration of the deity Bacchus, the wine god of drunkenness and debauchery, to whom wine was sacred. In olden years, long gone, the Irish drank mead made from fermented honey. The Bacchanalia are well documented in the historical record. The Bacchanalia were wild and mystic festivals of the Roman and Greek god Bacchus, introduced into Rome from Lower Italy by way of Etruria at around 200 BC. The Bacchanalia were originally held in secret and only attended by women. The festivals occurred on 3 days of the year in the grove of Similla, near the Aventine Hill in Rome, on March 16th and March 17th. Later, admission to the rites was extended to men, and celebrations took place 5 times a month. The extension happened in an era where the leader of the Bacchus cult was Paculania, although it's now believed that some men had participated before that. Of course, Bacchus, or Dionysus, is just the Greco-Roman reinterpretation of the ancient Egyptian mystery religion god Osiris. And the drinking of beer was sacred to the followers of Osiris, who was also known as the Green Man, as I stated. He was the one responsible for flooding the Nile and making everything green, meaning the planting and harvesting of crops for food. No crops planted, no food, you die. You see how the Green Man was their savior. Only one who knew when to plant. Never had calendars that people could read. No, it all came from the Pharaoh. In Egypt, beer was a food. In fact, the old Egyptian hieroglyph for meal was a compound of those for bread and beer. The bread-beer meal, plus a few onions and some dried fish, was the standard diet of the common people along the Nile at that time. Beer. I'm the guy that calls space. This is a View from Space. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. N.A. writes, glad I'm listening to the show. My grandmother used to listen to you all the time at our farm. She absolutely loved you. I'd sometimes find myself waking up in the middle of the night to hearing the radio on and hearing your voice. Yeah, I've been on the air for a while now, and there were a lot of people when I first hit the air that said I would last a couple of weeks. Well, it's been a little more than that. Tonight I'm talking about March, named after Mars, the god of war, son of Juno and Zeus. And I've already given you ample proof that the modern-day St. Patrick's Day shares both a date and a mandate with a far, far older celebration. And St. Patrick's Day has everything to do with Osiris and nothing to do with Ireland and driving snakes out of the island. That's the lie you're taught. In actual fact, the truth is, March 15th and March 17th, and in through all of March actually, are the seed planting days to harvest in the fall. And of course, beer was a food in ancient Egypt. That's why it's tied in so tightly with St. Patrick's Day. The bread beer meal, as it was called, had a little onions with it, some dried fish. That's a standard diet of most people living along the Nile at the time. And it was the pharaohs, the ancient pharaohs in Egypt, who had the knowledge of when to plant. Osiris, the Egyptians' first sun god, distinguished between the different beers by the alcoholic strength and dominant flavor. And none other than the god of the dead, Osiris, was hailed as the guardian of beer. Because of him, grain were sacred. The Egyptians believed that grain had sprung spontaneously from Osiris's mummy as a gift, a special gift to mankind, and as a symbol of life after death. Still gone to the other side in the netherworld, but he is still sending food back. Well, the godlike pharaohs used this as sufficient justification to turn brewing into a state monopoly and strictly license brewing rights to entrepreneurs and priests, just like they do today. Many temples eventually opened their own breweries and pubs in those ancient times in Egypt, all in the service of the gods. The port of Pelusium, the mouth of the Nile, became a huge brewing center, and trading in beer became huge business. This mixture of Egyptian festivities, Irish nationalism, and Freemasonry might seem outrageous to some, but in fact it was part and parcel of the Celtic culture before the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, namely the religion of the Druids. As the same religion as the ancient Egyptians, because Druidism started in the Middle East with the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and the tribe of Cain. The priests of Egypt were the professors and teachers of science, and were styled priests of Heliopolis, taught by the bloodline of Cain. Heliopolis, of course, the city of the sun in ancient Egypt. The Druids in Europe, who were the same order of men, had their name from the Teutonic or ancient German language, the German being anciently called Teutons. The word Druid signifies a wise man, and in Persia they were called the Magi, which means the same thing. St. Patrick himself was believed to have driven the Druids out of Ireland, but in fact Druidry was merely incorporated into Celtic Christianity, which was distinct from other varieties and would stay that way until it was forcibly changed on orders from Rome through the Roman Catholic Church. This is where British royalty had a problem with the Catholic Church. Yes, this invisible and secretive government that's running all of the governments of the world has an agenda. And their timeline is fixed. The objective is to bring about an absolute one-world dictatorship under one religion with the Antichrist as the god of it all. In order to accomplish this continual, planned, and orchestrated chaos that's being inflicted on you to bring about their new world order, the power that makes this system operate, witchcraft, is being used by the world's heads of state. There are over probably 160,000 witches in America and over 80,000 in Britain at this time. These are witches, and not to be confused with Satanists. Satanists are entirely different from those involved with the many forms of the Wiccan and pagan religions. I also have to point out to you, too, that the 160,000 witches in America and the 80,000 in Britain are the hardcore adepts, which means they are the priesthood, not dabbling. And for a more accurate account of all involved with them, I bet you could multiply that number times 13. The cult's number, which would be over a couple of million in America and over 1 million in Britain then, of witchcraft priestesses and priests. It's all of this witch power, this witchcraft power that gives the political governments advice and timing for their activities as they further their cause of a total takeover of this globe. This timing mechanism is vital to their operation because they believe it will bring optimum spiritual power to their efforts. Witchcraft has always had a calendar, and it's also strangely become the same basic calendar of the organized churches. Let me point out this ancient timing system to you. When you understand how they use it, you'll be much better equipped to understand the news. The ancient Celtic calendar of end-time illuminism is, well, all done with the ancient Babylonian Celtic calendar of the Illuminati. The British Isles have been and still are considered to be the holy land of the witches. The ancient pagan Celts used druidic and other forms of ritual magic for centuries and developed a system that divides the year into 8 divisions. There are actually 4 divisions of 13 weeks each. Now these 8 divisions, taking the 4 main ones and breaking them up into 8, these divisions are also known as the quarter days and the cross-quarter days. You see, the witches looked at the year as a circle, a wheel of a year, which has been traveled time and time again through the ages. This circle is divided into quarters and into halfway points between those quarters, making the 8. To this very day, there are 8 witching sabbats for their craft, as all of the rituals and those rituals prescribed to those certain dates at certain times. Now, as you look at these 8 days, you got to remember that the pagans devised these long before there was ever a Roman Catholic Church. So we know that it was the church that copied witchcraft. More next on AVFS on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy they call the Spaceman. This is a view from space. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. And I thank you so much for the one that you've sent. I really appreciate them. I really and truly do. Thank you. So, as I said, there is a setup for forms of ritual magic for centuries that have been developed and put into a system. And that system is our calendar that divides the year into 8 divisions. 4 groups of major holidays, witches, sabbats as they're called, with 13 weeks each, making up the 52 weeks of the year. Those 4 major holidays are also broke up, or witching ritual days are broken up into also another 4 called the cross-quarter days. That's the circle of the year divided. The first half, with May 1st until October 31st, is the male half of the year. May 1st until October 31st, being the male half. November 1st until April 30th is the female half. The first of the 8 days is Beltane, May 1st. This is also known as May Day. This was the day when the organized Illuminati was founded in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt in 1776. It's also the big day for all the communists to celebrate. May Day is disguised as a day for workers around the world. In fact, communism was set up by the Illuminati. Why? To pit communism against democracy, to bring about this needed confrontation for the Third World War. You need 2 combatants. They need to be opposite of one another. Yes, the communist world is Russia, no matter what they tell you about glasnost. That's a lie. They're being set up as the enemy. The second Sabbat is June 21st, which is the summer solstice. This is a quarter day, which also became known as Midsummer Day. The English Church calls this John the Baptist Day and celebrates it along with the witches. As every Sabbat has, there's always much intense spell casting. The most important day in witchcraft and most major projects launched on May 1st, Beltane. Some of the witches' customs that came from this include dancing around the maypole, the giving of May baskets, and this is the day when all of the covens of witches get together and do ritual work and intense spell casting. May 1, Beltane, cross-quarter day. The second Sabbat, June 21st, the summer solstice, and a quarter day, which also became known as Midsummer Day. That third Sabbat is the cross-quarter day known as Lunasa. In the witching world, this is August 1st, but as in every Sabbat, it's always celebrated the night before. The word Lunasag is in fact a Gaelic word which means the wedding day of the sun god to Mother Earth. So is also considered to be the beginning of harvest, and the pagans brought the first of the new wheat and made bread to offer to the sun god before his image, which was a sunburst of gold. The Catholic Church, true to form, copied the pagans by bringing the first loaves of bread from the new wheat to be used in a mass, which was offered before the Roman Catholic monstrance, and tabernacle box, which is a sunburst. This day became known as Loaf Mass to the Catholics, which was corrupted to Lammas, August 1st. Very powerful day to the Illuminati and as a major Sabbat to the witches. This is a day when witches concentrate on Mother Earth and feminists tend to go a little berserk. The fourth Sabbat is the autumnal equinox, which is around September 23rd. The Catholics honor this Sabbat by calling it Michaelmas, after Michael the Archangel. This was the traditional ending of the harvest when people had more money to give, and the Catholic system was more than glad to set its Witches' Day as a day to receive harvest offerings. The fifth Sabbat, celebrated October 31st, and is called Soen. This day, you call Halloween, marks the end of the male cycle and the beginning of the female cycle of the year. This cross-quarter day is the death night, when all the spirits of the departed would come out and demand favors. This is the second most important day in witches' calendar, but is the most active. This is a night of heavy ritual work and a lot of spell casting. The Catholic Church actually copied this witches' Sabbat and called it Halloween, or All Hallows' Eve. This was the eve of All Saints' Day on November 1st. According to the Catholic Church, there's also a particular point of interest with this day, in that the political Illuminati arranged for the U.S. election day to follow shortly after this time of intense spell casting. In the witching world, it's especially interesting when you realize that just after Halloween is when the ancient Celts butchered their animals that had been grazing since May 1st for their winter meat. Since these people that you had to do this butchering as soon as possible after Halloween, and that you could not do it on a Monday, the day of the moon, as the Druids forbade it, or the meat would quickly spoil if you couldn't do it. They set the first Tuesday, after the first Monday of November, as the day to slaughter the cattle, the sheep, the pigs, to put the meat up for the winter. Again, you could not do it on a Monday, the day of the moon. The Druids forbade it. In around this Halloween, May 1st, winter meat, November, end of November, going into the American election. This, I believe, is where the American Congress got the idea when they passed the law, which was setting the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November as Election Day in the United States for all time. So, what came out of it was this. In the ancient witchcraft Sabbat, Slaughter Day became Election Day in America by law. And this is really appropriate, too, because it's when the people were considered to be human cattle are slaughtered once again by the political system to pick a president. Look it up yourself if you doubt me. November 8th, the first Tuesday, after the first Monday, because remember the Druids forbade killing of the animals on that Monday of November. So the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November 2016, next year, America's election, is November 8th. The pagan law, no butchering on the first Monday. It's the day of the moon. So the 2016 U.S. presidential election day, November 8th, will also be the 58th quadrennial election in America. Yes, America will have voted 58 times. That's a hidden 13. I expect something big, or possibly even a postponement of the U.S. presidential election because of some, shall I say, crisis? It's possible. The sixth Sabbat is the winter solstice. It's known to the witches as Yule, of course. This is a quarter day, and it's on December 21st. Usually, the teaching is that December 21st, the shortest day of the year, the sun god Baal dies, but rises from the dead, that perfect number, 3 days later. The pagans reckon that this accounts for the days beginning to lengthen. And the Catholics actually copied the Sabbat and called it Christmas. Almost all the other churches copied the Catholics. Jesus was not born in December, but rather in the fall. Christmas, or Yule, is strictly witchcraft, but it's such a strong and traditional spirit that many people will never break free of that spell. The seventh Sabbat is the final cross-quarter day known as Imbolc. The word Imbolc is another Celtic word which literally means in the womb. This is another powerful Sabbat for the witches. This is the day when the witches believe there is a first stirring within the womb of Mother Earth. The Catholics copied this Sabbat and called it Candlemas, which is February 2nd, the same day the witches celebrated, of course. Strangely enough, even the non-religious get involved a little in the witchcraft of this day. It's called Groundhog Day, which commemorates the first stirring of the Mother Earth. Well, it's a groundhog in his hole. This little earth creature is believed to be able to cast an omen in the form of his shadow as the sun god Baal shines on him or doesn't shine on him, whatever the case might be. This is foolish to many, but the witches believe it. The eighth and last Sabbat is the vernal equinox, which is March 20th, coming up next week here in North America. This is also known for the first day of spring. The Catholics also copied this witches' Sabbat and called it Lady Day, in honor of what they say is the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. All of this strengthens the cause of Illuminati's members, weakening the unknown person, the unknowingly participation and the calendar of the Illuminati by the masses around the world to give them their power. The Illuminati plans to project this power. These 8 Sabbats of witchcraft, which they do ritually, by the way, every single year. 13 days from a Sabbat or a full moon is 13 days from a Sabbat, and it's a great day of activity for the witches. Friday the 13th. I talk about that next on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy that calls Space. It's a View from Space. This is Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. I thank you so much for the one you sent me. I appreciate it. I really do. So as I was saying before the break, another point to remember is that other days are used by witches and the Illuminists in connection with the 8 Sabbats that I just told you about. Witches meet on Friday nights, usually at meetings called Esbats. Now, if there's an Esbat 13 days from a Sabbat or a full moon, that is 13 days from a Sabbat, it's a day of great activity for them. The time's right for the spell to be cast. Now, if there is a complex system, it's around this 13-week, four groups of 13 weeks each to make up the wheel of the year. This complex system also has a system of astrology connected with it. And if those Sabbats are near a full moon or that they're 13 days from a Sabbat. It's a very powerful, potent time for spell casting. And if it's a Friday the 13th, it's also very super active. Now, you can't have any year without a Friday the 13th. And you can't have 4 in a year. I'm speaking about Friday the 13th because the way the Illuminati have set up this chaos calendar, the way it's constructed, there can be as many as 3, a maximum of 3 Friday the 13th occurring. And it does it again this year. I say again because we also had a maximum of 3 Friday the 13th in the year 2012, which was the very royal Olympiad year, the year that the 30th Olympic Games were held, giving London, England the distinction of being the first ever city in the world ever to host the Olympic Games 3 times. There were only 2 Friday the 13th in 2013, and only 1 last year in 2014. That was in June. Yesterday was March 13th, 2015. A Friday the 13th, ushering in yet another round of epic Friday the 13th in a trilogy. We'll have 3 this year. We've had 2 already. We had Friday the 13th last month, February. Exactly 4 weeks before this latest one, yesterday, March 13th. Then we have another Friday the 13th this year, 2015, in November, which will fall exactly 39 weeks after the first Friday the 13th occurred yesterday. 39 weeks, by the way, is 3 times 13. What's more, last year's lone Friday the 13th on June the 13th, 2014 occurred exactly 39 weeks, 3 times 13, before this past Friday the 13th, March of 2015. Also, next year's lone Friday the 13th, on May 13, 2016, will happen exactly 26 weeks after the Friday the 13th in November 2015. That's 2 times 13. You see what I mean by a calendar of chaos? The year 2015 started on a Thursday, and whenever a common year of 365 days, not a leap year, starts on a Thursday, it's inevitable that the months of February, March, and November will start on a Sunday. And any month starting on a Sunday always has a Friday the 13th. Of course, February is exactly 4 weeks in a non-leap year, so for that reason the days of the week have to match up with the same dates in both February and March during any common year. In any year, the days of the week always fall on the same dates in both March and November. In short, because the year 2015 started on a Thursday, that means February, March, and November all have to start on a Sunday, and all must have a Friday the 13th, giving you 3 the maximum. The trilogy repeats. The February, March, November, Friday the 13th trilogy repeats again this year. And it repeats more often than you might imagine. The last February, March, November, Friday the 13th year happened 6 years ago in 2009, before 2012. For the first time in the 21st century, from 2001 to 2100, it will happen 11 years from now, in 2026. Yes, this is the last time we'll see 3 Friday the 13ths until 2026. After that, the following February, March, November, Friday the 13th year will happen 11 years after 2026, in the year 2037. See how the calendar works? A grand total of 11 February, March, November, Friday the 13th years takes place in the 21st century. In 100 years, it happens 11 times. 09, 15, 26, 2037, 2043, 2054, 2065, 2071, 2082, who will be here then, 2093, and again in 2099. Yes, the Friday the 13th has many people locked into a culture of fear that's associated with it as well. There's even a word to describe that phrase of fear surrounding it. It's triskaidekaphobia, or the fear of Friday the 13th. Words taken from the Greek word tris, meaning 3, kai, meaning and deca, meaning 10, 3 and 10, 13. The word phobos means fear or morbid fear. It's the fear of the number 13 and avoidance to use it. It's a superstition related to the specific fear of the 13th person at the Last Supper, being Judas, who was said to have stabbed Jesus Christ in the back, metaphorically. It's also a reason for the fear of Friday the 13th called paraskevidekatriophobia. This is a myth that the earliest reference to 13 being unlucky or evil is from the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, where the 13th law is actually omitted. But in fact, the original Code of Hammurabi had no numeration at all. Triskaidekaphobia may have also affected the Vikings. It's believed that Loki, one of the Norse gods, the 13th god of the Norse pantheon, as a matter of fact. And Loki was believed to have engineered the murder of Balder and was the 13th guest to arrive at the funeral. This is probably related to the superstition that if 13 people gather, one of them will die in the following year. Though the oldest source of this myth, Lokasenna, has far more than 13 guests. 17 guests are actually mentioned by name. Another Norse tradition involves the myth of Norna Guest, when the uninvited Norns showed up at the birthday celebration, thereby creating the number of guests from 10 to 13. They cursed the infant by magically binding his lifespan to that of a mystical candle they presented to him. And another 13 phenomenon, Apollo the 13, launched on April 11, 1970, at 13:13 Central Standard Time, experienced an oxygen tank explosion on April 13th at 2100 hours, 7 minutes and 53 seconds. It later turned safely to Earth on April 17th. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster occurred on the 113th flight of the Space Shuttle. Princess Diana's death happened in the tunnel in Paris, Pont d'Alma, the 13th pillar. October 13th, a Friday, 1307, the arrest of the Knights Templar was ordered by Philip IV of France. While the number 13 was considered unlucky, Friday the 13th was not considered unlucky at that time. The idea that the arrest was related to the Friday the 13th was coined early in the 21st century and actually popularized by the novel The Da Vinci Code that's recently been published. In 1881, an influential group of New Yorkers led by the United States Civil War veteran Captain Will Fowler came together to put an end to this and other superstitions. They formed a dinner cabaret club, which they called the 13 Club. The first meeting on Friday the 13th, 1881, at 8:13 p.m., 13 people sat down to dine in room 13 of the venue. The guests walked under a ladder to enter the room and were seated among piles of spilled salt. Many 13 clubs sprang up all over North America over the next 40 years. Their activities were actually even regularly reported by the leading newspapers of the day, and the members of these clubs included like 5 future presidents, from Chester Arthur to Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. The number 13 also has a biblical significance, as the children of Israel approached the promised land after being led out of Egypt and the bondage there. One of the first cities the Israelites had to conquer was Jericho, and God instructed the Israeli army to march around the walls of Jericho. Well, I'll tell you that story when I return. It's driving home the point of 13, of course, and you will find out then. On the other side of the break, it's Talk Radio AM 640. I'm Space. I'm a Spaceman. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Listening to a view from space. I communicate by one way only. I have 2 addresses: by email only, spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. I really appreciate receiving your email. If you've got information, you've got a critique of the show, just like to say where in the world you're listening to the show from, please feel free. Now, as I was saying before the break, the number 13 is in the Bible. The God of the King James Version of the Bible instructs the Israeli army to march around the walls of Jericho once a day for 6 days, and then march around the walls 7 times on the 7th day. You know how many trips that is? That's a total of 13 trips around the city. After obeying all that, the God of the King James Bible was said to have had commanded the circular walls of Jericho to fall down flat, and the city was destroyed. These events are all recorded in the King James Version of the Bible in Joshua 6, verse 3 and 4. Joshua 6, verses 3 and 4. In numerology, 6 plus 3 plus 4 is equal to 13. The ancient Egyptians thought the number 13 was lucky because they believed that the 13th stage of life was related to the afterlife. After the decline of the ancient Egyptian civilization, the number 13 was still associated with death. But also, that's when the fear factor ended the belief. This fear of 13 can be seen even in how societies are built. More than 80% of high-rise buildings don't have a 13th floor. For example, a lot of airports will also skip the 13th gate. Hospitals, hotels regularly got no room 13. On streets in Florence, Italy, for instance, the house between 12 and 14 on all streets is addressed as 12 and a half. In France, socialites known as the quatorzens, the 14ers, once made themselves available as 14th guest to keep a dinner party from having an unlucky fate by merely having 13 people attend. You see, it's all done to enhance or to give power to the occult properties of the number 13. The Gregorian calendar, which Pope Gregory the 13th ordered the Catholic Church to adopt in 1582, works just like its predecessor, the Julian calendar. It has a leap year every 4 years. But the Gregorian calendar skips leap year on a century year, except for those divisible by 400. For example, there was no leap year in the year 1900, but there was one in 2000. This trick keeps the calendar in tune with the seasons. Yes, it's a magical trick. This result was an order of day dates that magically repeats itself every 400 years. In numerology, 4, of course, is the number of foundation, and every 400 years this calendar repeats itself. The calendar is the foundation of time. The calendar we use is the calendar of chaos, too. It's set up to create chaos. Chaos in the business world, in the banking world, also for rents being due, for the occult usage of numerology and days of events causing the chaos. Remember, chaos creates change, and change is what the overlords of our earth are up to. That's how they're changing this world from one empire to another. The transformation. When the Antichrist assumes power, he will change the calendar, thus changing time itself to a different calendar. The Antichrist will be seen to eliminate chaos from the world, you see, all the while being he and his system doing the creation of the chaos all along. As time goes on, and this chaos calendar of the Gregorian calendar, some years appear with 3 Friday the 13th. That's the maximum, of course. 3 is the perfect royal number. Others have 2, or like 2011, had just 1. And as I've already stated, no year is ever without 1. And that's simply due to the magical trick that I've revealed to you, known as the leap year. You see, the Gregorian calendar was constructed to skip leap years on centuries, except those divisible by 400. So, if I can go a little deeper into this magical trick to explain to you, there was no leap year in 1900. Why? Because the number 1900 is not evenly divisible by 400. But there was a leap year in 2000 because 400 goes into 2000 evenly, 5 times. This trick, this magical numerological trick, keeps the calendar in tune with the seasons and keeps the Friday the 13th coming. It's just a strange way that our calendar is constructed, with 28 days in February, and that is the key number, 28. And all of those 30s and 31s and the other months. When the 400-year calendar order is laid out, another incredible revelation occurs. You see that the 13th falls on Friday more often than on any other day of the week. Isn't it just a funny coincidence? The answer is, of course, no. There's a reason. Why? The real reason is, in ancient Rome, witches were known to gather in groups of 12. To this day, there are 12 witches in a coven. The 13th was believed to be the devil, him or herself, attending. With the Illuminati, the devil's always in the details, and the devil is buried deep in the details of the Gregorian calendar, and that's for sure. You see, as I said before, the Antichrist, when he takes control, he'll change the calendar. He'll change time itself, proving to you he's God. He'll go back to the original calendar. Only a new time will guarantee the return of genuinely spiritual, whole earth values as everyday consciousness, he will explain to you. Only a mind established in a new calendar of harmony and peace will be able to change change the whole earth values on a daily basis, he'll explain to you. Only by eliminating for once and for all the irregular and hopelessly inharmonious Gregorian calendar, the crooked standard of war and crime as business as usual, will the mind be able to breathe a sigh of relief and cry out, "Free at last I am from the illogical tyranny of 30 days hath September, April, June, and November." From a standard of disharmony, only conflict and disharmony will follow, and you will never escape the time of war. Only harmony produces harmony. This is the meaning of the replacing of the Gregorian calendar with the perfect, perpetual, and absolutely harmonious timing standard of the 13-moon, 28-day calendar. Only by making this simple but absolutely mind-shattering everyday change will the world be able to leave the time of war and enter the new time of peace, all ushered in together with the Antichrist and his coming. Yes, we're talking about a cause the Illuminati call the New Time Peace Movement and the untried solution. Change the calendar, and you will change the foundations of everything. That's what's coming. Few people know that in the first half of the 20th century, a vigorous calendar reform movement arose, supported by the League of Nations, even as a protest against the illogicality of the Gregorian calendar as a standard of measure. And after all, if you use a standard of measure with uneven units, you're going to go crazy trying to build something straight. You have to think about this, about how crooked a standard will create a crooked mind. And then look at the world around you and you ask the question, why do the problems of the world appear to be so hopeless? Why, hasn't the human race been able to cope with its problems? If we're so intelligent, why are we killing each other with senseless violence day after day? Where did this calendar that controls our lives come from, and who says we can't change it? That's what the Antichrist will be saying. The Gregorian calendar is a medieval timing standard invented by the Romans and inherited by the popes of the Vatican, who in 1582 decreed the Gregorian calendar reform and said that they had the most perfect instrument possible. This is meant to keep your mind screwed up for those who benefit from it. This calendar. The bankers benefit, politicians, religion, and how about those guys in the user fee racking up interest rates on credit card deals that fudge with the fact that 6 months is not 180 days? I'm a Spaceman. More when I return on Talk Radio AM 640. This is AVFS. We got to call space. This is a view from space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. I communicate by one way only, and it's by email. I have a couple of addresses. Spaceman at 640toronto.com is one, and space at 640toronto.com the other. And I just got to thank you for the one that you sent me. WK writes, "Hey, Space, please mention or address the nationwide Canadian protests against the anti-terrorism bill C-51. It seems many are waking up." And I've already beat you to it, sir. Right at the start of the show, I was mentioning that. I'm on about the calendars and this chaos calendar that we now have, the Gregorian calendar. It's a chaos calendar. It's meant to screw your mind up. And it's great for bankers, usury fee collectors. It's great for landlords. Because you see, the days of the months are uneven. When the Antichrist comes, he will take away this chaos calendar. They've been the one causing the chaos all along to create the change. But once the change has been made, there will be no room for chaos in the one world kingdom. And the calendar will leave. The Antichrist will bring in a new calendar. He'll change time, as only a god can do. And he will change it to the 28-day lunar cycle calendar. But what people don't know right now is that the Gregorian calendar itself operates in a perfect 28, not day, but year cycle. That is, every 28 years, the days of the week in the Gregorian calendar correspond. Every 28 years, it's the same exact calendar year. And since calendar is a society's macro-organizing principle, that means every 28 years the Gregorian calendar recycles its program. Check this out. With a little bit of hindsight, 2001, destruction of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. 28 years before 2001 takes you back to 1973. Same calendar year as 2001 again. The Twin Towers were dedicated on that date. Meant to last only 28 years. One perfect 28-year cycle in the Gregorian calendar. And then, poof, gone. The first shot of the Third World War. And 28 years before 1973, going back another 28 years on this 28-year perfection cycle, well, it takes you to 1945. The twin nuclear destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the end of World War II. Every 28 years, the Gregorian calendar repeats itself. When the Antichrist comes, that perfect 28 number will be 28 days in each month. So, what do you think? 2001. Twin bombs. Twin towers. Same calendar year. Karma or what? And 28 years before, 1945, 1917, North America enters the First World War, and the Russian Revolution occurs. Okay, let's go back one more 28-year cycle to test this out. 1917, 28 years before, takes you to 1889. Lo and behold, it's the precursor to the Twin Towers. The Eiffel Tower, built in Paris, and, as with the World Trade Center towers, the world's tallest structure when it was built, well over 900 feet tall. The Antichrist is going to change the world's calendar and say to you, the people, you don't really want to do another replay of the Gregorian calendar. There probably won't be anyone here in 2029 anyway at the current rate this program is playing out. That's why the New World Order will call an emergency halt to the whole show. The great calendar change is coming. It's coming soon. The new calendar will be the ancient one, the 13-moon, 28-day calendar. Mark my words, it will be. And the Antichrist will say, I'm going to get rid of the medieval anachronism and become one with the earth in natural time. That will allow the Antichrist to close the cycle of history, restore Earth's future, and fulfill the Mayan prophecy, a return to the garden. Could all of this be kick-started by an Illuminati event? to say, set the stage for this monumental time shift? This is the plan of the Antichrist to change the calendar to the original one once he is seated on the throne of the one world government. I tell you now, what I say to you is true, and it is coming. The 13th, Fridays. Yes, I believe things are happening so quickly now. We are indeed on a timeline, and it has to be done by a certain date, and I'm not sure of that certain date, but I do know that they're playing it up and playing it up big and moving towards a war footing. You remember the legendary rapper Tupac Shakur? He died on a Friday the 13th. The year was 1996. While Fidel Castro, the former Cuban president, was born on Friday the 13th, 1926. The Hollywood actor Steve Buscemi, known for his roles in Reservoir Dogs, Desperado, Con Air, Armageddon, The Gray Zone, Ghost World, Big Fish, the HBO television series The Sopranos, was born on Friday the 13th, December of 57. The former Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher, born on Friday the 13th, 1923. Yes, 13 has become so firmly associated in the popular mind with the notion of, well, bad luck. It's easy to forget the fact that the ancient mystic religions had 13 as the total number of participants in many orders and occult groups. For instance, as I said before, there are 12 members in a witch's coven, but the high priestess being the 13th. There's 12 Federal Reserve banks in the United States controlling the 13th. Yes, there are 12 Federal Reserve banks in the United States controlling their economy, all overseen by the 13th Federal Reserve Bank. There's 13 Illuminati bloodlines connected to the bloodline of Cain. The 13th Illuminati bloodlines connected to that line are known as the Merovingian bloodline. The number 13 is inlaid in the purest of the bloodline. Explosion of Apollo 13 spacecraft. It was in there. With Aquarius, which occurred at 1:13 in the afternoon. 13:13 military time on April 13th, 1970. More on the other side of the break. This is A View from Space on Talk Radio AM 640. Say VFS on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the Spaceman. Like to communicate with me? It's space640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. Thanks for the one you've sent. So I was leaving on the break just a minute or so ago. I was talking about the 12 Federal Reserve banks reporting to the 13th. The 13th one controlling 13 Illuminati bloodlines. The 13th is the purest, known as the Merovingian bloodline. And, of course, the number 13 inlaid in the Apollo 13 space mission, named Aquarius, which occurred at 1:13 in the afternoon, 13:13 military time, on April 13th, 1970. The event was actually meant to convey a message. And the message was, of course, 13, reincarnation, as the astronauts were given another life after being doomed on board a capsule that was returning from an aborted trip to the moon. Basketball superstar, international cultural icon, I guess you could say, and real-life hero, Michael Jordan, now entered into the richest men in the world category. A couple of weeks ago, retired from the NBA after completing, how many? 13 seasons as the most successful sports superstar of all time. When? Wednesday, January 13th, 1999 is when he quit. What does financial chaos lead you to? Chapter 13, bankruptcy, of course. In a court of law, there are 12 jurors, 1 judge, 13. The coming Antichrist emerges from the 13th and lost tribe of Dan, totaling, well, 13. In medieval England, the standard fee for the hangman, he was paid to execute prisoners 13 pence a turn. That's a shilling and a penny. And in those days, the shilling was, of course, worth 12 pennies, not 10 as it is today, making it 13 cents, basically. Yes, Chapter 13, bankruptcy. Law's got 12 jurors, 1 judge. Hitler closed out his peaceful time and went to war in 1939, because 39 is formed by a multiplication of 3 times 13, the highest possible magnification of a number in witchcraft to attain the greatest power possible from the number in a spell that's cast. Alexander the Great ruled for 13 years and bought his horse, Persepolis, for 13 gold coins. Yes, the number 13 is also the number of people included in sacred meals as the Last Supper, clearly showing that 13 is not the only most cherished number in the United States. It is not only the most cherished number in the United States, but also the most fortunate number for African Americans and people the world over of African descent. Let me mention a few connected to the United States historical symbolism. Starting with the 13 original colonies, the first national flag had 13 stars. It still, even today, has 13 stripes still. On the green side of the dollar bill, there are 13 steps in the pyramid of the Great Seal. The motto above the pyramid, which reads, Annuit Coptus, has 13 letters. The eagle on the right side has a ribbon in its beak that bears the motto E Pluribus Unum, which contains 13 letters. The eagle has 13 tail feathers. On its breast there's a shield of 13 stripes. In one talon, the eagle for America's symbol holds 13 arrows. In another, an olive branch with 13 leaves and 13 berries. Over the eagle's head are 13 stars that form the 6-point Star of David. And you know the phrase, July the 4th? It's got 13 letters. And the number 4, 1 plus 3. A 13, really. The birth number of the United States, July 4, 1776, which leads you to the real reason why the Founding Fathers chose that date as the official date of birth in the United States. In the occult science of numerology, it's said that he who understands the number 13 will be given power and dominion. It's a number of upheaval, destruction, a symbol of power from which, if wrongly used, will wreak havoc and destruction upon itself. Astronomically, on July 4th, the longitude of the sun is 12 degrees Cancer in the heavens, and on this date the sun conjoins the great star Sirius, whose longitude is 13 degrees Cancer. Sirius is the first magnitude star that is 40 times brighter than the sun and is the star that rules all African people. It was venerated in ancient Egypt from time immemorial and was held in great reverence by the ancient Egyptians because it rose haliacally with the sun at dawn during the inundation of the Nile River, the lifeline of ancient Egypt then. In astrology, it said, if the great star Sirius is well placed in a horoscope, it'll contribute to the amassing of wealth and acquisition of fame and honor. Sirius conjuncts the sun in the horoscope of the United States, in the second house of money and material possessions. The part of fortune is 13 degrees Capricorn, opposing the sun in Sirius in the 8th house of other people's resources. These powerful cosmic patterns explain astrologically the great wealth America amassed, which was done after the Second World War through the Bretton Woods Accord, of course, which forced every country to rebuild itself by borrowing American dollars. And only that is available by buying American bonds. So you had to invest in America no matter where you were in the world. This is how America took the place of Great Britain as the new empire, because it was getting a little too obvious that Great Britain was taking over the world. So they put in their proxy, the United States. And now, as you might well be able to see, that proxy, the United States, the great American empire, is about to be taken down and replaced again by another. And this one will be the final empire, the global empire. Cancer is the fourth sign of the zodiac, and it rules the continent of Africa, its inhabitants, the people of the world over African descent. The moon rules Cancer, and is therefore the cosmic ruler of all African people. The average celestial motion of the moon is 13 degrees per day. And 13 weeks is the time it takes for Earth to travel from the equinoxes to the solstices. For example, it takes Earth 13 weeks to travel from the first day of spring, March 20th, which happens to be next Friday, to the first day of summer, June 21st. 13 weeks from the first of summer to the first day of fall, September 23rd. 13 weeks from the first day of fall to the first day of winter, December 21st. And it takes the Earth 13 weeks to travel from the first day of winter to the first day of spring, completing the time wheel of life for a year. 13 times 4 is 52, which is the time it takes in weeks for the Earth to make one complete revolution around the sun. In most years, lunations, conjunctions between the sun and the moon, occur 13 times. I know, it's astounding. The fear of the number 13 is unfounded internationally as well. It's an honored number in a lot of other countries throughout the world. There are 13 occurrences of the quantity 13 in the design of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, the largest stone edifice ever built, by the way. In the Indian pantheon, there are 13 Buddhas. The mystical discs that surmount Indian and Chinese pagodas are a total of 13. And enshrined in the temple of Atsuta in Japan is a sacred sword with 13 objects of mystery forming its hilt. And 13 was the sacred number of the ancient Mexicans. They had 13 snake gods. 13th letter of the alphabet, of course, is M, which finds its roots in the 13th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, pronounced Mem, meaning mother, which was the ancient Phoenician word for water. The ancient Egyptian word for water was Mu, M is the most sacred of all the letters because it symbolizes water. Where the Illuminati want you to believe all life began. Ancient Atlantis, they called Mu land. The ancient Egyptian word for water, Mu. It's the root word for mother, and it relates to all of the evolutionary destiny of African Americans, and all of people of African descent who are ruled by the number 13. The American dollar is probably the world's best known banknote, right? But somehow many people understand the wrong thing about the bill, why the Great Seal of the United States of America is printed on it, or understand what these ancient symbols actually mean. But it takes you back to the ancient Egyptian mystery religion and its basis for it all. The Masons are the builders and shapers of the world. Order through chaos. Chaos brings about change. And they're changing the world into a global governance. It's obvious to see. And I'm revealing to you the plan tonight and the timeline and the actual method. And even what's going to happen to time once the Antichrist takes control. I'm Space, back with more right after this break on Talk Radio AM 640. Thanks so much for the email tonight. Space640toronto.com or Spaceman at 640toronto.com. I really enjoy them, I really do, and I thank you for sending them. It's a View from Space. I'm the Spaceman. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Today's calendar of 365 days has its origins in the ancient Egyptian calendar. The Egyptians originally had sacred calendars of 360 days, wherein the additional 5 days of the solar year were seen as outside the perfect circle of the sacred time cycle. So the last 5 days of the profane year were observed as non-days outside of time, and a time when time stopped. This is where the ancient Romans got their calendar from. They celebrated this time of year with ceremonial rituals similar to those that you've just been through. The Christmas and New Year's celebrations. They included time off from work, drunken orgies, cross-dressing, groups of people running naked around in the streets, which, by the way, is where the ritual of caroling from door to door at Christmas time came from. Even in the modern West, we see vestiges of this with the traditional celebration of New Year's Eve, where drinking, carousing are not only acceptable, but encouraged. It was against religious practice to add a leap year every 4 years. In 238 BC, the Greek Ptolemaic rulers, from a general in Alexander the Great's army, saw that the Egyptian calendar was nearly as an accurate measure of the year, and so decreed that every fourth year should be 366 days long. But the general populace didn't accept the ruling due to superstition, so it was put on hold until the introduction of the Julian calendar on January 1st, 45 BC, and the Alexandrian calendar by Octavian Augustus in 2625 BC. Most people who research this subject believe that the heliacal rising of the dog star Sirius, meaning simply the rising of a star with the sun as it comes up onto the horizon, marked the start of every year in the Egyptian calendar, which really isn't true because it was a wandering year and held in place by their knowledge and complicated adjustments involving the moon and other factors. The ancient Egyptians knew that Sirius would rise with the sun in the same location after 1,460 years, a period called the Sothic cycle, very much like a millennium to them. Obviously, in dealing with chronology and dates that have meaning to us with our calendar, it's very difficult, as the original location of the first heliacal rising of Sirius in the Egyptian calendar is often debated by historians and archaeologists, and these measurements between Sirius, who represents the ancient goddess Isis, and the sun representing the Egyptian god Ra, the basis of religion changed from the early years of the calendar. This is just purely based on what you could see with the naked eye. An example would be how we read Hesiod in Work and Days. It states, "But when Orion and Sirius are come into mid-heaven, and rosy-fingered dawn sees Arcturus, then cut off the grape clusters. Perses, bring them home." The clue is here, in what he terms as the rosy-fingered dawn. Early star alignments wasn't made by a cosmic rising sun being halfway on the horizon of the east, mainly because it was too bright for the naked eye to see the stars at that point. They were calculating with the sun below the horizon when a slight color of orange appears in the east. But by 45 BC, mathematics had advanced, and it was then possible to chart the sun being halfway on the horizon, and although you wouldn't see Sirius, the dog star, in the night sky at that point, as it was too bright, they probably knew that Sirius was there and was rising too. This is an important cosmic alignment to these ancient Egyptians. I believe the dog star Sirius is going to be very important to today's Illuminati also, who follow these ancient Egyptians and their ways to the T, to the letter. I believe that the first alien contact will be from the dog star Sirius. After all, we already have human voices coming from Sirius in the form of a radio satellite company, Sirius. That's why it was named Sirius. Obviously, the Julian calendar started on January 1st, 45 BC. The Sothic cycle wasn't used as it had a leap year. This means for several centuries after, if an alignment had been put into the Julian calendar, we'd see it until it was moved on a precession astronomy, meaning the movement of an object very like the wobble of a spinning top would. Now you can see how the early humans tracked a star's movement with their naked eye, and how different that movement would be when mathematical skills would kick in. This is the ability to track it before you see it with the naked eye. Some historians have conceded to the Roman writer Censorinus, who wrote that the Egyptian New Year fell on July 20th in Julian calendar in 139 AD, which was the heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star, in Egypt. But this is by the naked eye again, remember, not cosmic alignment. Also, the Egyptian priests, like the old ways that also didn't involve leap years, but some say it's possible to calculate the probable origin date of the original Egyptian calendar by using the Sothic cycle. This cycle was first noticed by Edward Mayer, by the way, in 1904, who then combed known Egyptian inscriptions and written materials to find any mention of the calendar dates when Sirius rose with the sun. He found 6 of them, which a lot of today's chronology is based. This is totally revealing. The word chronology itself, taken from the Greek mythology, Chronos, who is said to be the personification of time. The semen of Kronos was said to be placed in the recesses and produced the first generation of gods. His name in Greek actually means time. In the Roman myths, he was called Saturn, the source of the festive season of Saturnalia in ancient Rome. And I've gone deeper than a black hole on Saturnalia in around that December time period, many times. Death, particularly in old age, has been associated with Saturn since ancient times. At times, the freedoms created by the other planets are actually abused so that remorse follows. Saturn's color? Black. It's what's meant by the Dark Knight Rising. Saturn is Satan. Where there is unity, Saturn brings isolation. Where there is knowledge, Saturn brings fear. Where there is hope, Saturn brings skepticism and stalling. Kronos was imagined as a god in the form of a serpent with 3 heads, those of a man, a bull, and a lion. He and his wife, Serpentine Anaki, meaning inevitability, circled the primal world egg in their coils and split it apart to form the ordered universe of earth, sea, and sky in the myths. The calendar of 365 days long started on the 1st of Thoth and had 5 days added at the end of the 12 months of 30 days. Osiris had his birthday in these 5 days at the end of the year, but it must be remembered not to compare with our Gregorian calendar too much and Christ's birthday. Our calendar ends in the winter. The ancient Egyptian one ended in the summer. It's been postulated that before the joining of Lower and Upper Egypt around 3150 BC, the 2 countries developed their own calendars. Lower Egypt, the winter solstice, was looked on as the birthplace of the sun god Ra. In Upper Egypt, the year was measured as the time between the flooding of the Nile, which was important for farming communities living along the banks, where they noticed Sirius, the dog star, the Isis star, rising with the sun. That's when the pharaoh received his signal from the gods and ordered the planting to begin. You know, the original Roman calendar is thought to have been a lunar calendar, based on one of the Greek lunar calendars. The ancient Greeks started the day from sunset to sunset. The Romans and Egyptians started the day at sunrise. The ancient Roman calendar was closely linked to the science of the sky and gods, and Claudius Ptolemaeus. That calendar was used throughout the lifetime of the democratic period in Rome. Ptolemy's teachings were based on Plato's and Pythagoras' teachings, who thought that the earth was the center of the universe. The sun, the moon, the planets all revolved around a stationary earth at the center of the universe. The Romans divided the day into 24 hours, 12 of daylight and 12 of darkness. Obviously, this didn't run from midnight, but sunrise to sunrise. The Roman hour varied according to the season during the summer solstice around the 20th of June, when the period of daylight is longer than the night. Each hour was 1 hour 16 minutes long in Britain during the short days of the winter solstice around December 21st. The daylight hour was shorter, being only 44 minutes long. Within the Roman Empire, the hour was adjusted according to the differences in time and daylight time. The exact hour of 60 minutes only happened around the equinoxes. Vernal equinox around the 20th of March, and the autumnal equinox around the 20th of September. But those are Gregorian calendar settings. Sosigenes, the Julian calendar specialist, originally wanted the winter solstice to fall on the 25th of December. More chaos. I'm the Spaceman. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. More right after this break. I'm a guy to call space. It's a view from space on Talk Radio, AM 640. This is a final segment of tonight's show. There's very little known about the architect of the Julian calendar other than the fact that he was a student at the Great Library of Alexandria. This is Sosigenes I'm talking about, and was an Alexandrian Greek like Cleopatra. But it's obvious that he was an astronomer. Some researchers say that Sosigenes is created with a book on the orbit of Mercury that suggests that he knew Mercury orbited the sun and wrote a book on revolving spheres, among others. People disagree, as the Encyclopedia Britannica says this was a different Sosigenes who lived during the end of the 2nd century A.D. You know what it sounds to me like? More of the Illuminati confusion being interjected here to keep the masses in the dark, so to speak. I believe all of this is the belief system of the coming Antichrist, which is all totally based on the occult and not in truth at all. Which brings me to the latest headline. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the headline reads, March 13th, put out on a Friday, March 13th, on our Friday the 13th, our second one this year. The headline screams, Egypt unveils plan to build new capital east of Cairo. Now let me tell you, when Egypt was first split into two, Upper and Lower Egypt, with a king in the south and the king in the north, it was finally reunited by one pharaoh, united totally, and the capital moved. Yes, the upper and lower parts of Egypt were once separate and then were unified. One was red, the other white. The pharaoh of the south would wear the white turban, and the red turban was worn by the leader of the north in Egypt. Now, with Egypt totally united, the new pharaoh would wear red and white. Gives you an idea where these colors and the color combination for politics comes from. And when Akhenaten changed and united Egypt, he moved the capital. He upset very many people. And here again, if you go under this belief, and I believe this, that the Illuminati believe and see Egypt as the world, what happens in Egypt happens with the entire world. It's the world in microcosm, Egypt. Now Egypt is unveiling plans to build a new capital just east of Cairo. They say this was to ease congestion and overpopulation in Cairo over the next 40 years, but I believe it to be a signal. I believe it to be an Illuminati event whereby the world will follow exactly what Egypt does. It's supposed to happen in 4 to 7 years. We also had the Roman Catholic pontiff, the Jesuit, Pope Francis, say he'll spend no more than 4 to 5 years as the pontiff, and we'll have another change there. And I can't believe the words that came out of a man by the name of Madbuli. After gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh, the Red Sea resort, by the way, where all of the Arab nations meet when they're to agree on a certain thing. It's Sharm el-Sheikh. And Madbuli said this about this new city. The Egyptian parliament and its government departments and ministries, as well as foreign embassies, would move to this new metropolis that he says, in his words, we are talking about a world capital. Now, does he mean a capital city worthy of the world? Or does he mean that a world capital is going to be established in the belief system of the Illuminati? This world capital is going to be duplicated by the Antichrist, just as the Egyptians are going to form a new capital in Egypt. A new capital will be formed in the world. I believe it to be Jerusalem. And I believe all of this calendar chaos and all of these rising and falling empires have everything to do with a very specific plan. Because you see, the world as it was known then with the great Roman Empire, it amalgamated with the Egyptian Empire. When Julius Caesar visited Egypt, Cleopatra the seventh discussed with him how the Egyptians set their time by the sun rather than by the moon, and introduced him to the astronomer Sosigenes. He told Caesar about Cleopatra's ancestor, Ptolemy III's calendar, where he tried to implement a leap year every 4 years. Caesar liked it. He dropped the Roman months, and he and Cleopatra negotiated the fine details of such things like the date when the new year began. I believe they saw themselves as gods, channeling Saturn, Kronos, who were actually their ancestral family members. One reason why January 1st was adopted was from 153 BC. The Roman consuls had been elected to rule their regions on that date. And Pliny, the ancient Roman historian, recorded something very curious about these times that's very interesting to what I'm speaking about. He wrote, there were three main schools: the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, and the Greeks. And to these a fourth was added in our country by Caesar during his dictatorship. I believe Pliny was referring to Caesar introducing tenets from the mystery school religion, the ancient Egyptian mystery religion. Pliny continues, who with the assistance of the learned astronomer Sosigenes brought you the separate years back into conformity with the course of the sun. You might think, as I do, that in fact Caesar did set up one of the ancient religious mystery schools that today's Western mystery tradition is based on, which is a series of learning levels that must be achieved to become a god yourself, possessing secret religious esoteric information taken from the Hermetic secrets from Egypt to the Eleusinian mysteries that originated in Greece. Now, these secret fraternities have existed up to the present time, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I believe these secret societies are running our world today. The hopeless Roman calendar was sick in Julius Caesar's time, just like Julius Caesar himself being truly out of sync with the seasons, partly due to political tinkering. So the year 46 BC was made to be 445 days long, which was called the Year of Confusion. The new Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, of course, began on the 1st of January, 45 BC. And the Julian year of 365 and a quarter days was too long by 11 minutes and 12 seconds. But this must have been known to Caesar and Sosigenes. And maybe they thought that this could be left to future generations to correct, as Hipparchus had calculated that a leap year every 4 years would create a small error over 100 years before. But the Julian calendar was a stunning calculation for the ancient world. You have to realize that there was no such thing as a watch. And very few owned a watch until the 20th century, as a matter of fact, that was accurate to 11 minutes in a year until the quartz watch was invented. And that was 20 centuries later. Cleopatra didn't have the morality of the 21st century, and incest was standard practice in those days in Egyptian royal circles. She did murder her brothers and sisters to become queen of Egypt, and she did play a deadly poker game with the most powerful empire in the world during her era, and used sex to bring Julius Caesar and Mark Antony under her spell. But I guess you could also say she was a patriot, and although being Greek, she knew many dialects and really did believe that she was Isis on earth. And the thought the gods of Egypt were the only true gods, so did she actually sneak or bargain serious Isis into the new year of the Julian calendar. Time will tell, as they say. This has been A View from Space on Talk Radio, AM 640. Coast to Coast is next. I'm Space, and I'm out.